If you've been watching FNAF theories for a while, or more specifically a lot of game theory, you've probably heard of a certain term before. Occam's razor. It's a philosophy principle that, simply put, says that if there are multiple explanations for something, the explanation with less assumptions being made is usually the correct one. I'm gonna level with all of you. I've always hated that. It's a way to get an explanation for things that's about 80% accurate, maybe, but when it comes to me, that's not really satisfying. I don't want to leave a stone unturned just because it adds complications to the lore. I want to reach an answer that actually accounts for everything. But as of late, I've been under the impression that I'm actually in the minority in that regard. Let's use the recent video I made on the Stitch Wraith's appearance in Into the Pit as an example. In this game, the Stitch Wraith doesn't have its battery, has a movable jaw, and is stalking Oswald through his window. Those three things make absolutely zero sense in regards to how the Stitch Wraith works and acts in Fazbear Frights. And these three pieces of evidence led me down a rabbit hole, where I concluded that this game isn't just a retelling of the Fright story, but rather, it's a sequel that takes place after the events of the final Stitch Wraith stinger. Not only that, but the Stitch Wraith isn't being controlled by Jake, or Andrew, or even William Afton. Rather, it's controlled by someone else. Someone far more malicious that wouldn't need a battery, and definitely would have a reason for stalking Oswald. If you want to hear more about this, go check that video out now. Now, those are a lot of conclusions being drawn, and if I just chose to ignore this small detail, none of that would have ever crossed my mind. I would have just assumed that Into the Pit was a retelling of the Fright story, with slight changes made to it so it could better fit a video game. And I think that that's kind of an issue. At the end of the day, it is a non-zero chance that the Stitch Wraith's battery isn't missing due to a lore-related reason. Maybe it's because an artist forgot about it, or because they didn't think it would look good. Maybe they just didn't know the lore significance of this battery, and the fact that the Stitch Wraith shouldn't be functional without it. To all of the people that said that the battery is just somewhere else on its body, it doesn't work like that. The battery isn't just stuck onto the endoskeleton like a magnet on a fridge. Rather, it fits into a slot that's on the endoskeleton's chest. So we're left with three options. It was either an entirely unintentional change, it was an intentional change made without the lore in mind, or it was a change made entirely for the sake of the lore. And unfortunately, we don't really have a solid way of knowing which. We have to make judgment calls with very limited information. And this isn't actually the only example of it. There are plenty scattered throughout this entire series. Here's another one. Prototype Freddy. This comes from Ruin, which is in a little bit of a weird spot. Scott clarified that he didn't actually tell Steelwool the story of Security Breach, and because of that, Ruin had to more or less pick up whatever pieces of the story were left and try to tell a narrative. For the most part, it did a fantastic job of that, but there's one thing in particular I've never been able to wrap my head around. Toward the end of the game, you can run into what's left of Glamrock Freddy after the events of the Princess Quest ending, and he's in real bad shape, to put it bluntly. This was, of course, due to the Nightmare staff bots tearing him apart, but there's another change made to him here. The word prototype is now written on his foot. I hamper on design details a lot, I know, but that's not something you just throw in there for fun. And it's not present on Freddy's foot in Security Breach, so we have to ask, what happened here? Well, there are a few options for that. Option A. Steelwool just didn't give it to him in Security Breach. Maybe he was meant to have it, and Scott just didn't tell them that part. Or maybe they forgot, or maybe they just got the idea for it later on. I doubt that they just got the idea for it later on because, well, it's not like they really did anything with Freddy here anyway. It could be that they just forgot, but, well, then why would they just add it in here? They could have just left it out and it wouldn't have really made a difference. Now, the only explanation for this that makes sense in my mind is that Scott just didn't tell them about it until Ruin. And unfortunately, this is 100% possible. I really don't like the idea, but considering what Scott has told us about it, it very well may be the most likely option. But what if it's not? Well, then that would change things drastically. If the answer to this question isn't that Steelwool just didn't give it to him in Security Breach for whatever reason, then there's only one conclusion left to make. This Freddy is not the same Freddy that we see in Security Breach. It's an entirely different version of him. And funny enough, this actually isn't the only reason we have to think this. Inside of Freddy's chest compartment, we can see a green and purple gift box that really shouldn't be there. At the start of Security Breach, Gregory takes an orange and blue gift box out of Freddy that has a Fazwatch in it. Now there's a new gift box, and it's a completely different color. Someone had to put that in there, and the only logical explanation for it is that someone from Fazbear Entertainment did, and that it was put there to replace the Fazwatch that Gregory took at the start of Security Breach. Now, if there's anything we know about Fazbear Entertainment, it's that they're prone to cutting corners. They wouldn't waste their time replacing a gift box for Freddy if he wasn't in use. Pairing that with the prototype on his foot, I think it adds up to something. Between the end of Security Breach and Ruin, the Pizzaplex was open and Freddy was still active. At least that's what the clues are telling us here. But unfortunately, the environment is telling us the exact opposite. Despite all the signs that are pointing towards the fact that these two animatronics are different, they're certainly in a similar situation, aren't they? In the Princess Quest ending, Freddy gets knocked down into the Phaser Blast area and torn apart by the Nightmare staff bots. Then, when we see him again after completing Princess Quest 3, we can see the state that he's in. And it's pretty much exactly the state that we see in Ruin. Gregory even takes his head off and brings it with him. So on one hand, Freddy should look exactly like he does in Ruin, and he should be in the exact same spot we find him in. But on the other hand, he shouldn't have this gift box in his chest. There's no reason for Prototype to be written onto his foot. One side is easier and makes a lot more sense, but to pick it, you either have to come up with a reasonable explanation for these two things, or you have to ignore them entirely. So in order for Occam's razor to ever apply here, ironically enough, you have to make more assumptions. Either that, or just ignore evidence altogether. That said, when it comes to these two examples specifically, there's another variable. A variable that didn't exist at one point in time, but now, it's impossible to ignore, and it's been getting brought up in my comments quite a bit. You see, at a certain point in time, FNAF was made entirely by Scott Cawthon, without much help from anyone else. But as he said in his interview with Dawko, after FNAF 6 released, he realized that it was going to be too much for him to do all on his own. And considering the leap in scale from FNAF 6 to Help Wanted, yeah, he definitely wouldn't have been able to handle doing all of that by himself. Help Wanted was incredibly well received, but once we got to Security Breach, things got dicey. And now that we know that Scott didn't actually tell the people at Steelwool what the story was going to be, it calls into question a lot of things that we've seen up to this point in time, including the very topics we've talked about in this video. Why is there no battery on the Stitch Wraith? Maybe Scott wasn't involved enough with the process of the game being made to tell Mega Cat Studios about it. Why did Glamrock Freddy have these weird design changes at Ruin? Maybe they were supposed to be there in Security Breach, but Scott didn't tell Steelwool about it. Heck, we can take this a step further. Scott told us that he hasn't even played Help Wanted 2 yet. Did he approve of the Gravestone Order? Did he also approve of getting the puppet doll by entering a 1983 code, which potentially contradicts said Gravestone Order? What about 5 Laps? Was it his decision to call this the Midnight Motor? Or were all of these things just devs who happen to be fans making cheeky references? And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about the books for a second. Scott told us the writing process for the Tales books. He more or less creates the skeleton for a story and sends that over to others to have them fully flesh it out. How many details do they add that unintentionally get picked up by fans of the games as lore clues that were never intended to be lore clues in the first place? We just don't know. And since we don't know, we all have to make our own individual judgment calls. And those individual judgment calls will always contradict each other. It's all up to perspective, and none of us have an objectively correct one. This video, well, it didn't really serve much of a purpose in terms of answering any questions. In truth, half the reason I made this was filler. I needed a quick video that I could get up with minimal research before the week before came out, and I started pouring all of my focus into that. But I hope that, at the very least, it let you realize something. The lore of these games are a f***ing mess, and it can be easy to come to a conclusion, but you'll be hard-pressed to find the conclusion. The fun of theorizing is the hunt for the right answers, and figuring out new clues and sharing your findings. Although for some of you, it became a game of proving yourself right above anything else. And I get it, I want to be right about my theories too. We all do. But if you start dragging people down in an attempt to claw your way up to the top, you'll find it pretty lonely up there. But that's all for me. Next week, I'll be covering the week before. I may or may not end up going through it on stream. If I do, it probably won't be on my channel. So make sure you stay subscribed and keep an eye on the community tab. I'll let you guys know what happens. And seriously, I can't thank you guys enough for the support recently. I'm not expecting this video to get anywhere near as much traction as the last one because Midnight Motorist is apparently the content farm that keeps on giving, but even the views I got on my Stitch Wraith video made me super happy. And on the day that I'm recording this, I actually just hit 6,000 subs like a few hours ago. The end of year goal I have is currently 10,000, but at this rate, there's a chance I can actually shoot higher for that. Maybe. We'll see if I can keep myself consistent first. Until then, I'm out of here. You guys take it easy.